Greetings. This is the first in what I'm hoping to make a weekly series, which is a weekly wrap-up of my reading. Now, because this is the first video, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and what I hope to accomplish out of it. And given the fact that I'm usually pretty long-winded about these things and have a tendency to stumble over my words, there's a very real possibility that I'm going to spend the majority of the video just explaining what I want to do with this series, and maybe I won't have a lot of time to get to what I've actually been reading this week at the end, but we'll see. So, to begin with, a weekly reading wrap-up video. Now, I believe, or at least I certainly get the impression, that traditionally this is what BookTube is all about. People film weekly or monthly videos wrapping up their reading, talking about what they've been reading that week or that month and their thoughts on it. I've always done things a bit differently, and that's mostly because I came into BookTube sideways. I didn't consider myself a booktuber when I started out on this channel. I had been on my weblog, on my blog for years, writing written reviews of everything I read or everything I watched. I considered it a good intellectual exercise, and I enjoyed doing it. But when I hit 40, I started getting cramps in my hand, and I decided it might be a good idea to transition into making videos instead of writing everything out longhand. So I've always viewed these videos as an extension of what I've been doing on my blog rather than as a BookTube thing, and I've not really conformed to the what's the word? The traditions of BookTube very much. But this is the way a lot of other booktubers do it, is they will give instead of doing individual reviews, they'll just give weekly wrap-ups of their reading, and I'd like to give that a try. I've actually been thinking about this for a few months now, and have thought of several reasons not to do it, and one reason to do it. And obviously I've decided to go ahead and do it, but I'd like to talk a little bit about maybe the pros and cons of doing this, or maybe all the reasons that I shouldn't be doing this. I don't know how much my own internal monologue is of interest to other people, but I'd like to just get it all out there. So, reasons not to do this. First reason is I'm already doing reviews of the whole book once I finish it. So if I was to do a weekly wrap-up, that would potentially cannibalize the same material I would use for a later review when I gave the whole review of the book. Also, I don't really have a lot of spare time these days. And in fact, one of the reasons I was thinking I shouldn't really do this is because I've already started a number of projects on this YouTube channel, which I don't really have time to keep up with. So I thought, well, there's no point starting another project when you haven't been keeping up with all the other projects that you have started already. And then probably the biggest reason not to do this is because most people on BookTube are voracious readers. And I am not. And again, that's partly because, as I said before, I got into BookTube a bit sideways. I've always really taken my time with a book. So I'm not one of those BookTube people who said, okay, I read 10 books this week. I read maybe like 10 books a year. Now, despite reading little, I do like to give my thoughts on what I've been reading, just because I've a tendency to self-indulge, and I like talking about my thoughts. But I don't read voraciously. So if that's a entry-level requirement to do these videos, then I'm out the door right there. Okay, reasons to do this. So I think the main reason that appeals to me in doing this is so often I'll be reading a book, and again, because I'm a slow reader, I can spend months on a book, or years in the case of Don Quixote. I'll come back to this later. And then if I'm only doing one review of it, I only have one shot at the apple, so to speak. And for whatever reason, I often find that how articulate I am, how well I can talk, or how well I come off on the video, seems to vary widely from day to day. At least that's my own self-perception of it. So some days I'll turn on a video camera and I'll feel very articulate, and I'll feel like I'm saying everything I want to say. And some days I'll turn on a video camera and I just cannot make a coherent sentence for the life of me. And so then that's, 3 months I've been reading this book, and then at the end of it, I've got a YouTube video where I'm just incoherent and rambling, and it's not of interest to anyone. If I make weekly videos, then I've got several more shots at the apple. Even if the final video turns out to be a mess, maybe one of those weekly videos, I come off sounding halfway intelligent. The perfect example of this is this book, Don Quixote here, which I have been reading since December 2017. So 3.5 years now I've been reading this. The bookmark here actually is because I started rereading it after I finished it, because I thought, okay, I can't do the review now. I need to go back and reread the beginning before I make any attempt to talk about this book intelligently. So with a book like this, where I spend years just kind of chipping away at this, sorry, I have to apologize to everyone out there who's a voracious reader and is absolutely appalled by my slow pace, but it is what it is. And then I just make one video all at the end, and I've forgotten half of what's in here. And, especially with something like Don Quixote, where there's so much to talk about, where like every chapter has like 6 different layers of meaning, and there's so much stuff going on here. To attempt to talk about this all in one video at the end and try and remember everything I want to say, it's just a lost cause. So if I do weekly videos where it's kind of like a read-along, where even if it does take me several months to get through it, I can talk about my thoughts as I'm reading it, that appeals to me, and it takes the pressure off the final video a bit. So all that being said, let me talk about maybe the ground rules. These are the list of procedures I'll be operating with, or what I'm hoping to accomplish with these videos. For each weekly video, I'll try and film them on either a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Monday. So sometimes within those 4 days. And I'm just going to talk through what I've been reading for that week. So for example, if I read 20 pages out of Don Quixote, I'll talk through the plot of those 20 pages and maybe give some of my thoughts on it as I summarize the plot. Sort of like a read-along, maybe, except I'm usually juggling several books at once, so I'll also chime in with the other books I've been reading. Hopefully it goes without saying that there will be spoilers for everything I'm talking about, because it will be, I'm not going to be giving big picture type things. I'll be zeroing in on the specific plot that was developed in the pages I read that week. Also, along the themes of trying to make time for doing these videos, given how hectic my life is now, these videos are going to be even more relaxed, or even more low standard than usual. Now, I already do pretty much exclusively rambling videos where I just turn on the camera and ramble. So it's difficult to get more low quality than that. More low quality. To get less quality than that. But I do sometimes, I do quite often negotiate with my wife for a quiet half hour in the apartment, because, we've got a toddler running around, and the wife expects me to watch her most of the time, of course. I do often try and formulate my thoughts before turning on the video. Often I sometimes will make sure I brush my teeth before the video. If the toddler comes running in the room, I'll delete the video and then start over. something like that, for these weekly videos, just because I'm already trying to stick them in where I already don't have a lot of time, stick them in my weekly schedule, it's just going to be an anything goes type video. You know, it could well be one week me just holding the camera saying, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm sure you can hear the toddler screaming outside. It's not at all quiet in this apartment. Neighbors karaoke," or whatever. I'm just going to get the videos done whenever I have time. I'm not going to worry about anything. You know, if they're low quality, they're low quality. Apologies in advance. Oh, sorry. Something I should have mentioned with the previous point. I'm going to try to continue doing a comprehensive full book review when I finish a book. And it's very possible that I'm going to repeat material that's going to come up in this weekly reading vlog. In fact, maybe this weekly reading vlog could be almost considered a rough... This weekly reading vlog could almost be considered a rough draft of the comprehensive review I do at the end. So there could well be a lot of repeated material, and I can understand why that would not be appealing to you as a viewer. You're more than welcome not to watch everything. Hopefully that doesn't sound passive aggressive, but I mean it in a genuine way. Just if you find that I'm repeating a lot of material, then just don't watch the weekly reading vlogs and only watch the full book review, the comprehensive book review. Sorry, I shouldn't be saying comprehensive. That's the wrong adjective, because it won't be comprehensive. But it'll be a review in which I try and talk about the whole book, or my impressions of the book as a whole, or vice versa, or only watch the weekly reading vlogs. Okay, a couple other caveats and ground rules. The camera I'm using cuts out after 30 minutes. And I know I've gotten a few comments chiding me for not having replaced my camera after 3 years, still using this camera, which cuts out after 30 minutes. But to be perfectly honest, I sometimes consider that a blessing in disguise, that the camera just automatically cuts out after 30 minutes, because 30 minutes is long enough. If I'm still rambling after 30 minutes, somebody cut me off. So I'm going to continue using that system. The camera will cut me off after 30 minutes if it cuts off automatically, which it does. If I ever have to buy a new camera at some point, and I might have to do that sooner rather than later, there are some indications that my current camera is on its last leg. But if I don't do it sooner, I'll have to do it someday. If I ever do have to buy a new camera where I don't have a 30-minute time limit, I think I'll try and artificially give myself a 30-minute time limit. Because nobody wants to listen to me ramble on all day, and I've got other things to do, like watch a toddler who's running around the house. But that being said, I'm trying to experiment with collecting not only, this is a Google Doc here, collecting not only the page numbers I've read this past week, but keeping track of everything I read and watched this week. All the YouTube videos I watched, all the news articles I read, podcasts I listened to, and if there's ever a week where I'm light on the actual reading from the books, what I'd like to do is just continue on and talk about the podcasts I've been listening to that week, then continue on next and talk about the booktubers I've watched, because this is booktube, so I'm going to prioritize the community before moving on to talking about the YouTube videos I've watched in general, and then the print articles. And just that'll be the order I work through it in. And I will almost certainly never get through everything before the camera cuts me off after 30 minutes, especially not this week, because this week I've already wasted more than half my time just talking about my system or what I'm hoping to do. And if anyone's interested, I'll put a link to the Google Doc every week in the description down below, and you can see everything I've been reading or listening, if anyone's interested. In case I don't have time to talk about a certain news article or something like that, and again, I almost certainly won't have time to talk about everything, Just the fact that I've read or listened to it does not imply endorsement. So I might have an opinion piece here that I've read. If I don't have time to talk about it, don't assume that I agree with it just because I've read it. It could well be that had I had the time to talk about it, I would have outlined my disagreement with it. It's just a comprehensive list of everything I've read or listened to this week, not necessarily a list of stuff that I agree with. Although, that being said, more often than not, I'm like most people. I tend to gravitate towards political content that I agree with, but don't assume it, because possibly I might not agree with it. If I'm getting into current events, talking about news articles I've read for that particular week, then there's a very real danger I'm going to get into political commentary, which is something I've more or less tried to avoid on this channel. I've said more or less because I've slipped into it a little bit. I have strong political opinions, and when I was younger, like in my early 20s, I felt very strongly that everyone should hear about my strong political opinions. As I've gotten older, I've realized, I think as a lot of people do in middle age, that I'm an idiot. My opinions are very surface level. It tends to be predictable tribalism in that I tend to have knee-jerk reflexive reactions to sympathize with people I perceive as being on my tribe. And somewhat for that reason, among others, I've tried to scale back on the political commentary, certainly on my blog, which for years was my outlet. And I've tried to not get into political commentary on this channel, but I may be changing that rule if I start talking about news articles. This may seem a little bit like eating my cake and having my cake and eating it too by making a disclaimer like this. Actually, it probably is exactly that, but I would like to make the disclaimer that I know I have limited intelligence. So if you catch me, if at any point in the future I fall into the trap of getting riled up by my own opinions, just know that once I've calmed down a little bit later in the week, I will recognize that I'm an idiot. So apologies in advance. I think what I've been leaning towards lately, and my opinion on this changes frequently, but what I've been leaning towards lately is that even having recognized that I'm an idiot, it's still part of living a full life to attempt to parse the current events with your own opinions. So I think both of them are part of being a full person. One, having the acknowledgement of your limited intelligence, but then that being acknowledged to still try and jump in the arena and try and parse the news with your own opinions. All that being said, most weeks I probably will just waste all my time rambling on about the books, because I tend to ramble once I get on a subject. And I may keep track of how many pages I've read, just for my own benefit, just to see what an average week is like for me. So for this week, from Don Quixote, I read from pages 226 to pages 276. And from The Hand of Oberon, in the Chronicles of Amber series, I read from page 512 to page 536. So whatever total that ends up being, I'll put that maybe somewhere in the description of the video. Okay, I've only got a few minutes left before the camera shuts itself off, but I think I got all the preliminaries out of the way, and I'll actually talk about what I've read this week. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, Don Quixote, I'm on my second time reading through it. And the reason being, the first time I read through it, it took me 3.5 years, and I thought, I'm going to need to reread sections of this before I review it. So for this week, on my reread of Don Quixote, I got from page 236 to page 276. So let me talk about what happened in the book during those pages. This is part one of Don Quixote. If you're not familiar, Don Quixote was originally published as two separate books. The original Don Quixote and then the sequel. So this is still in the original Don Quixote. And near the end of the original Don Quixote, most of Don Quixote is very episodic. You know, he fights a windmill and then he comes back to himself. Or he goes to an inn and he thinks he's in a castle. Or he goes and meets some shepherd. He's just on all these episodic adventures. But the end of part one does begin to resemble more of a cohesive plot, where he's out in the wilderness and he meets this guy named, what is his name? Cardenino? Forgetting how the names are pronounced. He meets this guy who's out in the desert and he's going crazy because he's got this tragic love story. And he also meets up with the barber and the curate, I think curate meaning like a local priest, from his hometown, who had been in the beginning of the book but had disappeared for most of the middle of the book, but are now back because they're the only ones who care about Don Quixote and his well-being. So they're trying to find some sort of cure for his madness. Sorry, I'm assuming everybody is generally familiar with the premise of Don Quixote, even if you've not read the book. Through pop culture osmosis, you know it's about a guy who goes crazy and he thinks windmills are giants and inns are castles, and he just imagines everything as a medieval fantasy. So that's his madness. So it's the barber and the curate, Don Quixote's friends from his hometown, and they meet up with the Cardenino. I'm just going to call him Cardenino, the guy who's going crazy in the wilderness. And then they meet up with another woman, Dorothea, who's also going crazy in the wilderness, and she's has a tragic love story that's actually connected towards Cardenino because it's the same guy who screwed over both of them. He took away Dorothea's virginity and with a promise of being married to her, but then he married Cardenino's true love instead. So they're both pissed off at the same guy, and so the group then begins to travel. They're all traveling together. And this is like the first time in Don Quixote where we have like a recognizable plot is starting to come together. And then they come to an inn. And this inn actually, Don Quixote and Sancho Panza. Sancho Panza is Don Quixote's squire who's traveling along with him. Have been to earlier in the book. And Don Quixote thought it was a castle, of course, as he does. And then Don Quixote, once he realized it was an inn, refused to pay at the end of it, because he said, well, knights don't have to pay to stay at inns. You never read in these romances of a knight paying at an inn. And the innkeeper said, well, you've got to pay. And so Don Quixote and Sancho try to get out without paying, and get a little bit roughed up by the people at the inn, and think they escape without paying, although I think the innkeeper actually, Don Quixote leaves his wallet behind or something like that. The innkeeper gets his money some way. So now they're back at that same inn, and the traveling group, Don Quixote goes up to his room to pass out. And the rest of the traveling group gets into a discussion with the innkeeper about novels and romantic legends. And then there's a book in the inn called The Novel of the Curious Impertinent. And then they all start reading that book. And then for 20 pages, it just goes into telling the story that they're reading in the book. So it's a novel within a novel. And I should mention here, when I say 20 pages, these pages are rather text heavy. Let me show you what I mean here, if I can get this to focus. So you can see this is a bit of a larger book than usual. Very few paragraph breaks, no paragraph breaks for dialogue attribution, very thin margin, thin, small type. So it's 20 pages, but it's It's 20 pages of hard work reading this novel within a novel. And the first time I was reading this, I was like, oh, what is this? I thought we were finally getting onto a recognizable plot here, and now we're just into this novel within a novel, and why am I reading this? And it's about two friends, Anselmo and Lothario. And the plot of this novel within a novel is that they're two best friends, and they're so famous for being best friends that everybody in the town calls them the two friends. And Anselmo gets married to a beautiful, wonderful woman who's the love of his life, but he somehow gets it into his head that he can't really be happy with how much she loves him unless he has some proof that she's had the temptation to cheat on him and rejects it. So he talks to his friend Lothario and he says, you know, friend Lothario, you're the only one I trust. Could you help me with this by trying to tempt my wife into cheating on you? And Lothario says, what? No, that's a crazy idea. Of course I'm not going to do it. And Anselmo says, well, here's the thing. I'm so hung up on this idea that I'm going to do it one way or the other. And if I don't do it with you, I'm going to do it with somebody else. And I much prefer it was you. Because if it was you and my wife gives into the temptation and indicates that she's willing to cheat on me, then you can stop the charade at that point, and I trust you completely, so I know that you will stop the charade. Whereas if it was somebody else might not be so honorable. So you could perform the function of testing my wife, but still keep my honor intact. And you know, because this is Don Quixote, what I've just summarized takes several pages to play out with discussion between them back and forth. And Lothario tells him this is a stupid idea. Why not just be happy with the fact that you and your wife are happy and she loves you? Why try and test it? He says, don't test it, leave well enough alone. But eventually he gives in. And for a while, Anselmo will go away and leave Lothario at home with his wife. And Lothario will not try and tempt the wife. Lothario will just take a nap. But Anselmo, and then when Anselmo comes back, Lothario says, oh, you know, it's perfectly fine. Your wife didn't want to sleep with me. But Anselmo is never happy, and he wants to extend it, say, okay, well, why don't I go away for a weekend and you can spend the night at my place. And eventually he finds out that Lothario is not actually tempting his wife the way he was hoping he would. So they have a little bit of a back and forth when the news finally breaks, and then finally Lothario agrees to actually go through with it and stay with the week at the wife's house when Anselmo is away. And during that time, Lothario legitimately falls in love with the woman, with Anselmo's wife. And they start conducting a love affair that now they have to hide from Anselmo. And then Anselmo comes back and he's about to find out about their love affair. And I think it's just at this moment, if I remember correctly, that they get... Yes. Okay. No, the wife found a way to cover it up with an elaborate play acting, but then it says at the end of chapter, what chapter is it? They're all in Roman numerals. The end of one chapter says, for some months the fraud was concealed. But then fortune, turning her wheel, discovered to the world the wickedness they had so long and artificially disguised, and Anselmo's impertinent curiosity cost him his life. So you know it's going to go bad somehow, but just at that moment, the story within a story is interrupted by the main story, because Don Quixote has woken up and he thinks he's fighting a giant in his room. And he thinks that he slays the giant, he has a giant's head, but what he's really been doing, he's just been fighting